Could we be overrating Anthony Edwards for fantasy basketball for this upcoming season? We're going to talk about the Minnesota Timberwolves in today's show. So, Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com. And you can find me on Twitter as always, at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Thank you for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free. We are available on all platforms. We're talking Minnesota Timberwolves today. Just a quick couple of housekeeping notes. Yes, I am doing more Points League mock drafts this week coming up. Yes, I am doing Points League sleepers and busts. That is coming this week as well. Yes, you will get invites for the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl. I've sent those out for about 15 divisions so far. 10 head-to-head and 5 Points League ones. So they've come out, but there's still, I'm going to crank out a bunch of them. But that does bring us actually into talking about the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl. We might as well just have a look at that, Warnie. What do you think?
Let's get it on, Gilly.
All right. The last episode that we did, the Milwaukee Bucks preview, not that many people applied for it. So that's interesting. So if you are looking for a spot, get your applications in because they are linked below in the show. And you can get into the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl. What I might end up doing is if the applications are drying up a little bit, we'll go back to some of the earlier shows for people who didn't get in, and I'll start chucking those invites out. But there are some spots available if you want into this large prize pool where if you do end up winning it, you will get minimum $5,000 for a $50 entry. So that's how that works. Got points or categories. There's an entry form, as I said, linked below in the show description on YouTube or in the show notes on the audio side of things. I'll be back later to give a entry question for the Timberwolves about the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl. We are sitting here, or I'm sitting here on the 24th of September. I am tongue-in-cheek predicting that there will be a Damian Lillard trade on Monday, whether that is Monday the 25th in Australia or Monday the 25th in the States. I'm not really sure. I'd say probably more leaning towards 25th in the States, but I think it's coming this week. I think it's coming in the next 2 days, and when it does happen, I'll do a show breaking down whatever happened there, and of course, all members of Basketball Monster will get the analysis first over there as we adjust the projections first, then I'll come out later on and do a little bit of a show, but all the intricate, nitty-gritty details of that deal will be broken down on Basketball Monster, because I think that is going to happen in the next 2 days or so. And just to be clear, I haven't been told that by anybody. That is me trying to read what is going on. Nobody has told me this. And I know I have Portland information that I have passed on in the past. That is not what this is. So just don't get that mixed up. All right, we are talking Minnesota Timberwolves. Let's have a look at how they play out for the season. What is their schedule looking like? 45 quality games. It's not a bad number. It's not the best. It's not the worst. It's just totally reasonable. Nothing to really bang on about. It's probably a little bit on the low end, but it's okay. They have the fewest amount of back-to-backs, which I guess is a good thing when you consider Mike Conley, who I think might be one of the players, along with Al Horford, maybe Chris Paul, who are in line to rest every back-to-back. I don't know that he will, but at his age, I think that we are at a situation where he could get the Al Horford back-to-back spasms. And they only have 13 as opposed to 15. The reason that he might not is they don't have other point guards, and that would be the problem. We're going to address that later on. They have 14 maximum game weeks. That's sort of in the middle of the range. And their playoff schedule's not super strong. So bear this in mind if you are reaching high for Anthony Edwards or you're banking on a big Karl-Anthony Towns bounce back. Is there got a 2-game week in there, depending on your schedule? If you finish on the 24th of March, like the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl, they go 4-2-4. If you finish, I think, is that correct? I'm not sure if that's correct. Let me just quickly double check that. No, that's right. That's right. If you finish on the 31st of March, they go 2-4-3, so 2 games in week 1. And that's okay. 434 for Yahoo default 7th April and 344 for 14th of April. Now, I will say this. People will often ask me, hey, Josh, what week is that? Don't worry about week numbers. Honestly, don't. Like, part of the reason why I tend not to refer to week numbers, and if you do want to know, on Yahoo, the 24th of March is listed as week 21. But some sites name weeks differently because there is the 2-week All-Star break period, which on Yahoo gets mushed into 1 week, and those 2 weeks get called 1 week. I think it's week 17. But if another site doesn't mush those two together, then week numbers get skewed by 1 week. So I might say, hey, finish in week 21. And for some of you, that means one thing. And for some of you, others of you, it means something different. That is why I always refer to dates. It is very specific. It is non-ambiguous to finish on a specific date. That is why I say that instead of finish week 21. 24th of March, which might be week 21, it might be week 22, depending on how your site sets it up. 24th of March is when I suggest ending the NBA fantasy basketball playoffs on that date. What are the pressure points in this rotation? What happens with a full season of Towns? Because we had the big, clumsy interloper in Rudy Gobert joining this team last season, and we thought there'd be a decent impact on Towns, and basically everything that I thought would happen happened. But then Towns got hurt, and we didn't get to see it all play out. How did they adjust? How could they adjust? What did it mean for Edwards? Because we assumed that Edwards would take this big step forward, but he also got to be the number one option without really any competition all season. And now, if Towns is healthy, him and Brook Lopez, probably the two, maybe Vooch as well, the biggest indicators of Iron Men injury prone. Towns was the guy who used to be Mikal Bridges. He's never missed a game. Doesn't miss games in college, high school, never missed a game in his NBA career. The Iron Man, I'll take him number one because he never misses a game. And now, it's like, I'm never drafting Karl Towns, man. He's always hurt. Because that's what happens. And the same with Brook Lopez. His career, look at his career, 82, 82, 82, like 10, 5. And then he went back and played like 77, 77, 13, and a lot of minutes. Like, it's all over the place. So, if Towns is ready to go, how does that impact? Because this might be, we've got a little bit of them towards the end of the season, but they still need to feel each other out. Towns and Gobert pairing. And then also Conley's in that mix. Edwards and Towns, how does the usage get distributed? It's still big question marks. The other pressure point is Mike Conley's health, because he's older, as I said, and I think there is a risk that he sits out some back-to-backs, because the bloke is just turned 36. But if he goes down at all, and he's had injury problems, especially with that heel and Achilles in the past, they don't have other point guards. Like, there's Shake Milton, there's Akil Alexander-Walker, but he's more of a 2 now than a 1, and Shake's probably more of a 2 as well, although he'll be okay. If Conley does go down, Shake is going to be awesome. But what it does mean is if Conley does go down, in terms of pressure points across the lineup, what it could mean is Kyle Anderson boosts to 30 minutes and he plays point guard, but also the ability of Conley to be this top-level distributor just doesn't exist for guys like Milton or Alexander Walker if they are forced into that role, meaning that the looks that the other players like Towns and Edwards in particular get might be a lot more difficult and the offense might bog down. And that is a concern across the board with the status of where Mick sits in terms of his health for this season. Today's episode is brought to you by DoorDash. I think you've heard of DoorDash. You probably have. You've probably ordered food from them, got your restaurant meals delivered at home, and you sit there on the couch knocking it out. But what if you need groceries and you decide, I'm not ordering something, I'm going to cook it up. And I mean, you got everything set out, you got your knives there, they're sharpened, you got your little pans out, nice and clean, ready to go, and you look and go, man, I don't have garlic. How can I possibly make a jambalaya without my garlic? So you go to DoorDash. And they do groceries now. Thousands of different grocery stores. You get the best ones in your local area. So you're helping support the local economy. And you save on all your grocery and delivery services with a $0 delivery fee on eligible orders as well if you get that Dash Pass membership. You get exactly what you ordered. They've got best-in-class customer service. Just like you're there picking the stuff yourself. So get 50% off your first DoorDash order up to a $20 value when you use the code LOCKEDONNBA at checkout. It's a limited time offer and terms apply. That's 50% off up to $20, no minimum subtotal, and 0 delivery fees on your first order when you download the DoorDash app in the App Store and enter the code LOCKEDONNBA. Don't forget, That code is Locked On NBA for 50% off your first order with DoorDash. Now, this is going to seem contradictory. Breakout candidates. I hope you know by now what I mean by breakout candidates. I'm listing Jaden McDaniels here. I'll give you a spoiler because I think Jaden McDaniels is a little bit of a fantasy bust this season. But breakouts and regressions are different to sleepers and busts. And I'll give you a quick definition of what I mean. A breakout is someone that I think has got a real chance of, or has a chance. If things break out right, I can see it without too much squinting of them exceeding projections. A regression is a guy that I look at what they did last season. I think there's going to be a big drop-off. A sleeper is someone that I think you're getting value on them at their average draft position or fantasy rank. And a bust is where I don't think you're necessarily getting value on them at their spot. So they can all be the same. Like a sleeper player might be a breakout candidate. A regression guy might be a bust, but they don't have to be the same. And you might have someone like McDaniels who is a bit of a breakout candidate, but most value from drafting him at the moment is being taken away by where he's getting picked. And the odds would suggest, like when I do my projections, most of it is like, what is a median type outcome here? What is a general expectation if I theoretically simulate a season 10,000 times? Where do we sort of sit in the middle of this? That's how I project things. And with McDaniels, I project him at a certain level, and where he's ranked in his ADP is, it's way too high. But he could also go through that, and maybe best case, 10% of outcomes, 5% of outcomes, he reaches that ADP and rank, which still makes him a bust at that spot, but still a real chance to exceed what I did. And I know as I say that out loud, it sounds bloody confusing, but I think I got the point across. I hope I did. If I didn't, hit me up, let me know. Anyway, McDaniels, heading into year 4, and he is honestly one of the best, if not legitimately the best perimeter defender in the NBA, or not even perimeter. Legit best, let's call him a hybrid defender, because he can protect the rim and he can switch out onto the perimeter and shut guys down and do them all better on the perimeter, but do them all at an elite level. All that is true. For fantasy, that doesn't matter that much because he doesn't get offensive opportunities. He doesn't generate assists. He's a putrid rebounder, largely because of who he plays next to. But even last season, when Towns was out, he didn't really put up big numbers. And he's really good, but doesn't get 2 steals. He doesn't block 2 shots. And he shot the ball well, but it's on so low volume. He just doesn't put it all together. There is opportunity in year 4 that maybe something happens and he just elevates. And it might be a bit easier with Conley replacing Russell, but I just don't see it in his game to be an offensive usage takeover sort of a player. But again, maybe. I'm not ruling it out like I would rule it out for certain players. Like, do I think Mike Conley's got a chance to blow up this season? Not really. But I do see some upside there in McDaniels. We've referenced this guy's name a few times this show already, and it's time to put him under the lens. It is Karl-Anthony Towns. Towns last season was someone that I faded pretty heavily. He was getting an ADP in the, let's have a look. I've actually got the numbers from last season. His ADP last season was 9th. I had him at about 16th, and I had him outside my first round because I said, I don't see it. My argument was he's going to get hit from both sides. He's going to lose rebounds and block opportunities from Gobert. He's going to drop his field goal percentage because he's going to take more threes and be on the perimeter. And then on the offensive side, he's going to lose usage to Anthony Edwards. And every one of those things happened. He finished on a per-game basis 38th in Yahoo points, 44th in ESPN points, and 32 in category leagues with a -1 rank. We saw significant drop-offs in Towns' numbers. He still played 33 minutes a night, 21 points with 2 threes, 8 rebounds, almost 5 assists, 0.7 steals, 0.6 blocks, shot 50 from the field and 87 from line. All of that is unbelievably good. 21 and 8 with 5 assists, 21, 8 and 5, 2 threes, 50 and 87. They are elite numbers. But for fantasy, that's not first round because he lost so much. What did he actually lose, you ask? Well, in terms of minutes, and I've seen this argument as well with Towns, where you can't look at his numbers from last season, Josh, because so much of what was happening was as he came back from injury and his limited minutes, he played the same minutes. His minutes the last 4 seasons, 33.9, 33.8, 33.5, 33. So he played half a minute fewer per game. That's okay. It is half a minute. It's not a huge number, right? That's not really part of it. Now, some of it is the injury and getting used to the other guys there, but that's not what it is. He went from 10 rebounds to 8 rebounds a game. What he did do was bump his assists from 3.6 to 4.8, so a big win there. But his blocks had been 1.2, 1.1, 1.1, and they went to 0.6. His field goal percentage went from 53 down to under 50. His free throws actually went up from 82 to 87, but he also took fewer of them. Lower usage, 6.3 attempts down to 4.7. He hit the same amount of threes, and he scored 4 fewer points per game. All of that was relatively predictable. But now we sit in a situation where people come in and they see Towns and they see his ranking, and he's ranked at 29 on Yahoo. He's got an ADP of 36 on ESPN, and people go, well, we're way under on Towns here. Surely, I had someone say, well, surely you can look at him end of first round or early second round, and I don't agree with that. Because, as I said, I had him at 15 or 16 last season, and even he was worse than I thought, irrespective of the injury. The rebounds just disappeared playing next to Gobert, and I'm going to show you a little bit more on that later. And as you can see on the graph here, this is rebounds per week. He got that injury in week 7, so we did have 6 weeks of action from Towns early on. Then he came back at the end, but he's pulling down 30, 34 rebounds a week, which sounds like a lot, but it's not. It's 8 a game. It's not that much. His minutes, as I said, were pretty okay. Had a couple of big spikes early on, and he did have some lower minute weeks at the end of the season as he came back. But overall, half a minute fewer per game than he played in previous seasons. But what really happened is when you cut your block rate in half, and it had already been trending down, and when you got a guy who was getting good block numbers, and that was part of the reason he was a first rounder, and you had, out of the weeks that he played 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 weeks. He had 0 blocks in 5 of them. That's unacceptable. The most he had in a week was 5, not a bad week. A couple of 3-block weeks, but that's still a block a game or under. And he just is not going to have those opportunities when he is the 3rd best rim protector in that starting lineup. So I don't expect that he goes back to over a block per game. I don't expect he goes back to double-digit rebounds per game. I don't expect he goes back to leading the team in usage. So while we can look at his season being ruined by injury, I don't think it's that far off from how we should expect him to play moving forward. Maybe he's a little bit better in certain areas and the field goals go from 50 to 52. That's a distinct possibility. But if you're going to factor that in, you've also got to factor in that maybe the free throws drop from 87 to 83 or 84. But I don't think the rebounds or the blocks or the usage are coming back. Does he stay at 5 assists a game? Maybe that goes back to 4. So there are numerous things where I can say, oh, maybe, but also numerous things where I can say, yeah, maybe the other way. And that doesn't give me a level of confidence. In saying all of that, some of his weekly performances were okay. A couple of top 10, in fact, out of the first 6 weeks, in terms of -1 value per week, he had 4 top 10 weeks. Sorry, 4 top 15 weeks. That's obviously really strong. And that's sort of in line where I expected him to be ranked for the year. Struggled a little bit when he came back and obviously had the injury week. I think depends how you want to view Towns for this season. I just think we're looking at a guy that I wouldn't want to do top 20. I definitely wouldn't want to do first round. Third round, very end of the second, I get it. I do understand it. But, there's no very clear, it's not like a Damian Lillard the year before situation or even a Chris Middleton this season. We go, well, it's very obvious what happened and we're going to expect big time return to form. Like I in a points league Yahoo, I'm not even sure that he's necessarily a third rounder. In an ESPN, the same. Is he a third rounder? I don't know. I'm not confident in that. And that's not really super injury related. The other thing to have a look at here is Towns is on his Darko DPM change graph. He sits at, how old is he? He's 29, I think, or 28. No, he's 28. He's 28. So he's not quite, and it's amazing how, not accurate, but it's amazing how much this pattern holds. When you hit 29, you start to decline. You see Towns with that huge positive growth early in his career continue to get better and better and better. And as you see now that line is approaching the 0 mark, meaning he's starting to flatten off in terms of on-court impact And within a year or two, it's probably going to turn into a negative slope and he's going to start to decline. He's still very good. He's still an unbelievable offensive player, an unbelievable shooter, a great facilitator, but he's now like a number 2 guy offensively. Doesn't bring the defensive stats. And honestly, his future's in doubt on this team. That brings us to another thing, is that what if he gets traded? He might go to a situation where the rebounds go back up, the usage goes back up, the blocks go back up. Instead of, they're not going to be 2, but maybe they're 1.1 or 1.2. All of that can happen. So, while I'm illustrating a lot of doom and gloom here, there is a possibility that he's dealt. I want to show you this graph. I've got 3 players on this graph. It is Towns, it is Gobert, and it is Giannis. On the bottom, it is the amount of times they contested shots at the rim per 75 possessions in percentile. And on the y-axis, it's on the x-axis, that one, and y-axis is defensive rebounding talent, according to Basketball Index, in terms of percentile. You'll see Towns and his 2023 season right in the bottom left corner. That is almost at 60th percentile for rim contest per 75, down from 75th percentile the year before that. So he just wasn't contesting shots anywhere near as much. Obviously, because Gobert is there. Interestingly, when we look at Gobert's rim percentile went up. He actually started contesting more shots in Minnesota versus when he was in Utah, which is not by much, like from 91st percentile to 93rd. And the other one there is Giannis, who, again, I compare to as a guy playing power forward with a lot of center sort of things. Obviously, offensive game is different, but we're not looking at offensive game here. But Towns also would drop significantly in his defensive rebounding talent. He went from almost 95th percentile, which is around the level that Giannis has been the last 2 years, down to 85th percentile. And you'll notice that Gobert suffered a drop as well. Gobert went from 98th percentile in defensive rebounding down to about 93, which is where Towns was the year before. And then Towns dropped down significantly. So Gobert did take a hit, and Towns took a bigger one. And it is really hard for me to see him getting those opportunities for blocks while Gobert... Now, if Gobert gets hurt and plays 20 games, then Towns is going to have to do more. Or Nazari does it. So when I'm talking about the lack of bounce-back ability, it's just that he's just not going to be in position as much to grab defensive rebounding or defensive rebounds or to contest shots at the rim. And they're 2 of the biggest issues that we had with Towns from this last season to come back and produce any sort of level of real value, unfortunately, or real value around that first round ADP. He just wasn't going to do that. This season, maybe there's a sneaky little bit of appeal just because of where he is currently positioned with an ADP of 36 on ESPN. I actually really like that. But his ADP is at 22 on Fantrax. I don't think that shows amazing value. It's not dreadful, but it's not amazing. But it's just going to depend on where you're looking at him. What about a sleeper?
Rudy Gobert. Rudy Gobert.
Is this outrageous? I know everyone hates Rudy Gobert. I know that. And honestly, he can be pretty cringe at times. But he still is someone who I think is a little underrated at the moment from a fantasy and maybe even a real life perspective. There were significant drop-offs from Gobert last season, but I think that when we look at what happened, like he went from 2.1 blocks to 1.4. That is an enormous drop-off. He was still, as you saw in that graph before, he was still contesting tons of shots at the rim. I don't know that 1.4 is a realistic number that we expect him to stay at. He went from almost 15 rebounds per game down to 12. But unlike Towns, he did suffer a minutes drop. He went from 32 down to under 31. And in fact, over the last 7 games, he was playing 30 minutes a night. Over the final 35 games of the season, 29.8 minutes for Gobert. That impacted. Now, his overall rebound rate did dip quite significantly. It's one of the lowest rebound rates of his career because he is trying to share that with Towns. And we saw that on the list as well, that he suffered a drop, but not as big as Towns' drop. But part of the reason that obviously there is a level of hatred with Gobert, we also saw his usage drop down as the season went on. He didn't score as much. His field goal percentage dropped, and it's always one of those things. When you rely upon a 70% field goal guy, you're probably going to have a bad time the next season when he becomes a 67 player, which is Gobert went from 71.3 to 65.9. He could very easily be back to 72 or 71 this season, and that impacts so much about him. But I think some of these ranks are a little off. He's ranked 69th over on Yahoo.
Giggity!
His ADP at 62 and his Fantrax ADP at 64. Reasonable. I've got no problem with that. Because if we look at Gobert even from a -1 rank last season, he was 45th. That's, taking into consideration that, if you've got Gobert, it's going to be bad with your free throws. Now, I thought he'd still be able to maintain most value and be like a back-end second-round guy for punt free throws, and it definitely didn't turn out that way. But I don't think it was as bad as these current ranks for this season would suggest. Especially on ESPN, where he's ranked 81st for 9-cat and an ADP of 83. And on ESPN, his points rank is at 77. Now, Gobert last season was 70th in ESPN Points League rankings and played under 31 a night. Like, if he gets 32, 33, he should be able to go back up there. I just think that he's one of those guys. We get the young players, the Durans, Mark Williams, and Onyeka Okongwu, Nick Claxton, Wembanyama, Chet Holmgren. They're all getting the hype as the big man who blocks shots. And I think Gobert's sliding a little bit. 1.4 blocks isn't good. But nobody can sit here and tell me that if Rudy Gobert came out and had a season where he blocked 2 shots a game, that you'd go, wow, that came out of nowhere. Because it didn't. Like, that's who Gobert has been. So I think that there is a little bit of value for him because it's all about the slide. If he starts sliding into the 80s, to the 70s, it's almost, you almost can't go wrong with it, I don't think. Well, I hope. Time for a question for the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl if you want in. Rudy Gobert averaged how many ESPN fantasy points per game last season? The answer is 33.43. That is all you need to answer. 33.43 for Rudy Gobert, ESPN points per game last season. Let's look at some fantasy busts. I prefaced this before. I think Jalen McDaniels is venturing into bust territory. Why? Because at rank of 102, with an ADP at 115, you're expecting some steps forward from him this season, which I'm not sure are necessarily going to present themselves. Last season, for -1 rank, he was 138th. And he played most of the season without Karl-Anthony Towns. McDaniels averaged 12 points, under 4 rebounds, 1.5 threes, 0.9 steals, and a block. We look at Giannis and we say, man, what a dreadful season he had defensive stats. He basically had the exact same stats as Jaden McDaniels, who is an elite defender. Now, I know that we took Giannis in the first round and McDaniels was a late round pick. I know that. But the way that the narrative is framed around those two things, Giannis dropped off completely. I've had someone, and I'm pretty sure he's trolling, who keeps saying, yeah, because Giannis now gives Julius Randle defensive stats. Or he gives Jaden McDaniels defensive stats. Either one of those, yeah? So we look at McDaniels rightfully as an absolutely elite defender, but it doesn't come through. Like 12, 4, and 2 with a steal and a block. He shoots 74 from the line. He does shoot 52 from the field, and he's developing into a good 3-point shooter, but it's in low volume. He also finds it hard to stay on the court because of foul trouble. So, look, he's ranked 134th on ESPN points, got an ADP of 130 on ESPN, and I love it. That is totally good value. In fact, you might even say that's a little bit of sleeper value because the guy's going to start. Hopefully he plays 33, and hopefully there's a step forward. But when you're picking him at 102, especially in the Yahoo points league where he was not remotely on that pace, he was 148th, averaging under 24 fantasy points per game last season. Like, you take him at 102, like, I'm sorry, that's just losing tons of value. 102 is your 9th or 8th best player. 9th? Yeah, 9th. 9th best player in a draft. It's very hard for me to see him pushing to that number. His ADP at 115, that's your 10th best player. It's okay. I would much rather get him in the 120s or 130s because when we talk about what's the path for growth, well, this season it might be worse because instead of 20 games of Towns, you might get 70 and you'll get maybe more Gobert and Conley and Edwards are still there. So where's the path opening up for him to do more? And I don't think it's there. And we're 30 minutes in and I've got to tell you about Goose. Anthony Edwards is at the moment, he's not quite bowl level, but he's really got the highlight reel bias going. Because honestly, it's not even on-court highlight reel for Anthony Edwards. It's everything. Yes, he does some unbelievable things, crazy athleticism, big dunks, but the bloke is so likable, right? He just does the funniest interviews. We love all that stuff that he does, apart from, the homophobic comments, of course. But we love the other stuff that he does. So we look at him, he's the best player on Team USA. Allegedly, he's giving out these big quotes, and we all just assume huge stuff's coming. But as always, the question should be asked, how? How is he getting to this number? How is he getting to this level? How can we feel confident in it? He's in year 4. Last season, he averaged 25, 6, and 4.5, almost 3 threes, 1.6 steals, 0.7 blocks, shooting 46 and 76. The way he's got to get from, and where did he rank last season? Like 33rd. And on -1, he ranked 28th. So to get to these numbers, actually last season he had an 8. No, he wasn't that. Last season he was 31st -1. Yeah, his ADP was 20th, so he didn't even bring that level back, and he had an X rank of 37. But he's been bumped up so high under the expectation that he's going to become a 28-point scorer, I guess. And that means more usage has got to come from somewhere. Is it more away from Towns? But he's got to become an efficient shooter. He's become a better 3-point shooter, but the free throws have always stayed poor for his high attempts, and he needs more attempts, definitely. And I'm just not sure that, he's ranked 9th on ESPN Points League. So I was looking at ESPN's ADP, which is 17. I go, actually, for an ESPN Points League, that's pretty much bang on. And same as Yahoo ranking him 16 for Points Leagues, that's bang on. But then ESPN Points Leagues has knocked him up to 9. And I just don't want to do it. There's just too many things I think that need to change in his game. He needs more usage with a full season of Towns. He needs better field goals and better free throw percentage. He needs to probably get 5.5 assists a game. And I'm not sure he can do that at this. I think he could be really good. And maybe he does break out. But again, if he was sitting at 25, I'm all for it. But he's not. You're burning, ADP 13 on Fantrax means probably half the people are taking him in the first round. ADP of 14 on Yahoo. Yahoo. I don't know why I said it that way. Probably half the people are taking him in the first round. And there's actually no upside from that. I don't see any upside in taking him at 10. How does he do better than that? Balancing the probabilities, you would have to say that it is way more likely that he doesn't finish that high than that he exceeds that number. In the first round, really, we want someone to just sit at their number. And it's way more likely to me that Edwards finishes well below that. Maybe he's 22nd, 23rd. Maybe he does absolutely blow through the stratosphere, but it's in my head that a lot of the hype for him is just man, look how funny he is. Look how good these highlights are. He's got so much swag. All these stories, he's too big for Minnesota. He's the next budding superstar. Well, if he was that good, maybe they wouldn't have lost in the World Cup 3 times. Maybe. He just, at the moment, he's skating through a little bit and getting a little bit of hype, which is in some areas deserved, but maybe I wouldn't want to do it in the first round. Maybe. Their playoffs were ruined by a couple of hand injuries. Not that they would have beaten Denver, but Jalen McDaniels and Naz Reid both suffered injuries. As for Naz, I'll talk about Naz later on. They're both healthy and ready to go. Great. Trade option. I think Towns is a genuine risk of being traded. Where he goes, I don't know. But I think he is a genuine risk of being traded. And if they do trade him, they would need a point guard because they have no point guards of the future on this team. And they would need some wings, someone to play, because you'd play McDaniels at the 4, you'd want someone at the 3 next to Edwards. So that would change tons for so many players on this team. I think it's a genuine chance. In terms of contract year stuff, Mike Conley and Kyle Anderson and Jordan McLaughlin are unrestricted, while McDaniels is restricted. Anderson is an interesting one, always puts up good value when he plays, but also remember when this team was healthy, he was playing 24 minutes a night and wasn't useful for fantasy, and it required Towns missing 50 games for him to be a 12-team league player. So if you're in a situation where you've got a stashable bench, he's good for that role. But on a healthy team, I just don't think he plays enough to actually matter most of the time, where he might be like the 128th best player and jumps to top 90 when someone gets hurt. In a lot of cases, in a head-to-head, smaller bench league, that's probably not going to be worth it. As for Conley, I took him in round 10 of the 16-team mock the other day, because it's round 10, it was a pick 160. And I feel really confident he's going to beat that number comfortably on a per game basis. But if I'm in a 12-team league, I'm not sure I'm bothering with him because I don't think he's got ability to jump into the top 100. I worry about some of the games missed for him. And I just think there are more lottery tickets to pick there. Now, he might be fine if he slides to like the pick 150 in one of those leagues. Then when we talk upside and breakouts, all that sort of stuff, like we might be, hey, I only take a young player in every round. But if a guy that might be 120th falls to 155th, that actually does retain some value. You grab some lottery tickets earlier, then you got a situation where, well, he's going to be your 11th best guy and you got it with your last pick. And that is value in itself. But he doesn't become absolute must-draft territory in 12s, I don't think. Rotation risks. Well, it's going to be what do they do with the big man, and that includes Naz Reid. Do they stagger Towns and Gobert? But if they want to play Reid every night, Towns is never going to get a minute at center. And we had this theory that whenever Gobert is not on the court, Towns will get his 16 minutes at center. It'll buffer some of the drop-off. But if Reid, and they paid him like this, and he puts up good numbers, if Reid's playing, Towns will never play center. Will they play ever with Reid, Gobert, and Towns on the court? Maybe. I don't know. But how all of that pans out is going to be very intriguing. Would they rather get more McDaniels at the 4 and stagger him to play with Reid in the second unit? Would they rather Towns play? I don't know. But that 3 literal best position that they play center guys makes it very hard to get a rotation that enables all of them to produce at their level. Reid is a guy, again, if you're in a deep league situation, in a roto league, you sit him on your bench and you can stash him. Because if someone gets hurt, mainly Gobert, but if someone gets hurt, he's a great player. But in 20 minutes a night, I'm not sure it's going to, if it's even 20 minutes, I'm not sure it's going to get there. The other one is, they could play Shake Milton as the backup to Mike Conley. And that gives him interesting stash ability as well. But in order to get Kyle Anderson on the court, maybe they just have to make him a point guard. And he plays the backup 3 behind McDaniels, a little bit of backup 4 behind Towns, but he also has to play as a point guard. And he's quite good at that. And if he does that, then there is a chance he gets more minutes. But if he doesn't, then he's playing 20 minutes a night. Because remember, they've also got 2 really interesting young power forward prospects on this team who I don't think are going to play much this season in Josh Minott and Len Miller. But that also impacts where the hell Anderson sits in this role and in this rotation. That brings us to the per-minute monsters, Naz Reid and Kyle Anderson. We know this. We know that if they play big minutes, they will be absolute 12-team must-roster players. It's just getting there is going to require injuries. So drafting them with the hope of someone getting hurt is never a really good prospect unless you're in a stashable weekly, a roto, or a deep bench format. I often will say take an upside player in the last, always will say it. Take upside players in your last rounds. But the upside player situation is, well, what if they just outperform per-minute numbers while they're on the court? What if the coach decides to give them this role that we didn't see coming in preseason? That's what I'm talking about upside. It's about what if Asad Thompson starts opening night and plays 31 minutes from the jump, then that's great. What if Amen Thompson gets 28 minutes backing up Van Vliet and Jalen Green opening night? That's great. It's very hard to see how Naz Reid plays 25 minutes. It's very hard to see how Kyle Anderson plays 29 minutes unless there's an injury, which turns that into you'd have to just wait on that value to appear. The other one that's never going to happen this season is Josh Minott. Just very good numbers. Steals, blocks, rebounds, passing ability. He's a bit skinny. He's more of a 4 than a 3. But I really, really rate him as a long-term dynasty dart throw player. What's their depth chart look like? They're going to be starting Mike Conley at point guard. Shake Milton had that run where he hit a week last season where he was the 3rd-ranked player when Harden and Maxey were out. Really worked on his passing and was quite good. So he's one to watch. He'll become an elite streamer, and if the league does go deeper, he's not a bad one to hold on those 13 back-to-backs and plug him in. There's Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who is a 2 now rather than a 1. His passing's not really there. He's quite good defensive. He's got good size. He's not really a good fantasy guy at this stage. And then there's McLaughlin, and Jalen Clark's going to be out most of the season with an Achilles tear. He's on a 2-way. He's not going to impact much. On the wing, it is Anthony Edwards, and then behind him, there's not much. It's Troy Brown Jr., it's Wendell Moore Jr. I don't know why I put Jalen Clark in both of those. Clark's more of a guard than a wing. I don't know why I put him there. But their wing depth, as I said, if they trade Towns, they need wings. There's no one there. Who plays the 2 and the 3 on this team? Look, if Edwards goes down, it's probably Alexander Walker that starts at the 2, but he can't really play up at the 3. Like it's pretty rough on the wings. At forward, they're going to start Jaden McDaniels with Kyle Anderson and Josh Minott as the backups. Now, Anderson can play the 3-4, so can Jaden. But then there's how you fit everything else in here with the bigs like Towns and Gobert. And then behind them, it's Naz Reid. Then there's Leonard Miller, who I think should have been a lottery pick and got in the second round. And there's Luka Garza on the 2-way. So Miller's really not going to play. He can play a bit of center. He's probably more of a 4. But with McDaniels and Anderson there ahead of him, he's just not going to play that much, unfortunately, as much as we want him to play. And that brings us to Durant and Bazemore. I guess I buried the lead a little bit with Edwards there as well. I find it hard to see how he reaches some of those numbers, but Durant does actually push him up. It pushes him up from maybe like the 28th best player to like the 20th best player. So I still don't love it in the first round, but there is a boost to some of his numbers. In terms of Bazemore, my dynasty metric, which uses a bunch of things: age, experience, usage, current projections, advanced stats trends. What else do we use in there? I think they're the major factors that are in there. And with a sliding scale that you can turn for rebuilding and contending, it's got Edwards as a top 5 guy. It's got Jaden McDaniels in the top 100. That's pretty clear. But it's got Towns outside the top 40 because, look, he might be 30th this season. He's 28. He's heading towards that peak area. Now, if you skew it more towards contending, then he'll push up a little bit higher. But that's where he is. Whereas Leonard Miller's in the top 225. I really do believe in Miller, but that's the thing you have to be careful with in Dynasty. Like, Miller may never make it. He might not ever become like a starter, and he's in a pretty poor situation at the moment for his role. So the first 2 years might be just non-existent for him. So it's really hard to theoretically, I could easily see him being a top 70 player, but taking him at pick 100 in a dynasty draft means you might have pretty much zeros for 2 years. So that's why he's pushed down low. Again, if you just really want to stink and tank for a couple of years, then there's more value in someone like that. And that'll do it for me today. Don't forget to follow this podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on the Odyssey app. And if you are here on YouTube, thumb it up and leave your comments down below. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.